How to rewire your mind for total confidence. Carl Jung observed that the confidence people chase by force of will is almost always a mask stretched tight over a wound that never got looked at. There is a line from Nietzsche that Jung returned to again and again in his seminars on Zarathustra, and it goes like this. The worst enemy you can encounter will always be you, yourself, from Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Part 1. And Jung would stop a room right there and say, do you see it? The thing you are trying to rewire around is not outside you at all. It has never been the world doubting you. It has been a piece of your own psyche standing in the doorway of your confidence. Arms crossed, and no amount of forcing a new belief on top of it will move it, because you cannot out-affirm a part of yourself you have not yet met, and that is the quiet ache under this whole video. You have tried so hard to talk yourself into feeling sure, and some nights it works, and some mornings you wake up and the old smallness is sitting on your chest again like it never left. And I want you to know you are not broken, and you are not alone in this. You are simply fighting the wrong enemy with the wrong weapon. So here is a small first-person resolution. Just 3 lines, nothing more. I notice the moment my confidence collapses without warning, I stop calling it weakness and start calling it information. I make the unconscious conscious. Say it with me. I notice the moment my confidence collapses without warning, I stop calling it weakness and start calling it information. I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I notice the moment my confidence collapses without warning, I stop calling it weakness and start calling it information. I make the unconscious conscious. If something in you just went a little quiet hearing that, type the 2 words, face it, in the comments. Just those 2 words. Let it be a small seal on what you already know is true about yourself. The first key is this. Confidence does not fail because you are weak. It fails because a piece of your psyche breaks off and acts on its own. Jung called this a complex, and he did not mean it the way we use the word casually now. A complex is not a personality quirk. It is what he called a splinter psyche, a cluster of memory and feeling and image that has enough emotional charge to behave almost like a second will inside you. Most of the time it sleeps. And then a stimulus word, a tone of voice, a look across a room, touches it, and it wakes. And Jung wrote plainly, complexes can have us, from Collected Works Volume 8, and notice the direction of that sentence. Not, we have complexes the way we have opinions, but complexes have us, the way weather has a coastline. Think about the moment your confidence actually leaves you. It is rarely a slow fade. It is a sudden drop. You are mid-sentence in a meeting and your voice thins out. You are on a first date and your wit simply vanishes. That suddenness is the signature of a complex firing, not a gradual failure of skill. Imagine an ordinary Wednesday. You have practiced a presentation in the mirror the night before. You know the material cold. You walk into the room feeling like yourself, and then someone in the back asks a question in a slightly bored tone. And just like that, your throat tightens. Your hands forget what to do with the clicker. The person you were 60 seconds earlier is simply gone. And afterward, you spend the whole drive home rehearsing what you should have said, calling yourself names for something that, looked at plainly, was a mild question from a stranger. That gap between the size of the moment and the size of your collapse is not a mystery to be embarrassed about. It is data. It is the exact shape of the splinter showing itself. And here is the part that quietly changes everything. You did not lose your confidence that day. Something in you that had been waiting, unnoticed, for exactly that tone of voice, simply stepped forward and took the wheel for a while. That is what having a complex actually feels like from the inside. Not weakness, occupation. And this reframe alone is worth the whole video, because it means the problem was never that you lack confidence as a fixed quantity, some tank that runs low and needs topping up with better thoughts. It means a specific splinter gets triggered by specific things, the bored tone, the raised eyebrow, the silence after you speak. And once you can name even one of these splinters, You can watch it coming the way you would watch weather, rolling in over a coastline you know well, which is a very different posture than bracing yourself every single day and simply hoping today is not the day it happens again. I make the unconscious conscious. The second key is this. You can actually catch a complex in the act, because it leaves a physical trail. Jung's earliest fame, before the shadow, before the archetypes, came from a laboratory technique called the word association test. He would read a list of ordinary words to a patient and time the response with a stopwatch. Most words came back in under a second. Table, water, mountain. But every so often a word would stall the person. A long pause, a stammered answer, a flush of color rising up the neck, sometimes even a small tremor in the hand holding the recorder. And Jung realized the delay itself was the diagnosis, not the answer that finally came out. The length of the silence before it told you exactly where the wound was buried. In one documented case from his 1910 study, The Association Method, a small theft of 70 francs had gone unsolved in a household, and Jung ran the association test on the suspects. One man's responses stumbled every time a word brushed near money or guilt. His hand slowed, his breathing changed. The pattern was so clear and so specific that when confronted with it, he simply confessed. The complex had already testified before the man ever opened his mouth. Now think about how ordinary this actually is. Imagine a Sunday evening. Your partner asks, quite lightly, "So what do you want to do about next month?" And you feel your own voice go strange for half a second. Too bright. Too quick, before you say something breezy like, "Oh, whatever works." That tiny stall was the test running on you without a stopwatch. Or imagine your mother calls and asks how work is going, and there is a fractional hesitation before you answer. A held breath you did not choose to hold. That hesitation is not nothing. It is the complex clearing its throat before it borrows your mouth. You have been giving yourself this exact test your whole life, in kitchens and cars and comment sections, without ever timing it. So pause for a moment and pick one real word or question that makes you stall. A topic, a name, a simple ask like, "How are you really?" And just notice, next time it comes, that half second before your face arranges itself into calm. Do not judge the pause and do not rush past it, because noticing the pause is the very first thing that separates you from the complex. The complex wants to run through you unnoticed and unclocked. The noticing alone is where your ego starts to stand apart from it again. And once you can see the gap between the word and your answer, you can never quite unsee it. I time my own pause instead of hiding it. The third key is this, and this is the one I think you will recognize the most painfully. The confidence collapse almost never matches the size of the trigger, and that mismatch is the fingerprint you are looking for. Think of it this way. A smoke alarm that goes off because of a house fire is doing its job. But a smoke alarm that screams because someone lit a single match across the room is telling you something about the alarm, not about the match. And most of us walk around with at least one alarm set far too sensitively, wired years ago to a fire that is long since out, Jung recalled. In memories, dreams, reflections, an encounter with a distinguished older gentleman, cultured, aristocratic, thoroughly composed in company, who in a private moment of disagreement, suddenly and violently slapped a servant across the face over something almost laughably small. The man's own persona of refinement cracked open in an instant, and what came through the crack was not the polished gentleman at all. It was a splinter psyche that had been sitting behind that polish the whole time, waiting for the smallest provocation. And Jung's point in telling it was never that the man was secretly cruel. His point was that none of us actually know what is standing behind our own composure until something pokes it. Notice too what the gentleman did immediately after. By every account, he composed himself again within seconds, apologized stiffly, and returned to being cultured and aristocratic, as if nothing had happened. And that fast recovery is its own clue, because the ego so badly wants to believe the outburst was a stranger passing through and not a resident. Now bring this home to an ordinary week. Imagine a Tuesday. You wake up feeling steady. You get through your morning meetings fine, and then at 2:30, someone in a shared document changes a sentence you wrote without asking, and something in you goes cold and sharp all afternoon. You cannot concentrate. You rehearse a comeback you will never say. You feel 11 years old again, for reasons you cannot name. By dinner, you are short with someone who had nothing to do with any of it, and by the time you lie down that night, you are half convinced you are simply a difficult person, when the truth is smaller and stranger than that. One edited sentence cannot account for an entire afternoon of cold fury, and that gap, that leftover unexplained weight, is exactly where the old fire is still burning. The trigger only supplied the match. Consider a second version of the same week. Someone in a group chat leaves your message on read for 3 hours, and you notice yourself checking your phone every few minutes, composing and deleting 3 different casual follow-up texts, and if you are honest, quietly rehearsing whether you have done something wrong. Again, the size of the response has nothing to do with the size of the silence. A complex does not announce itself with a sign around its neck. It announces itself through overreaction, through the response that is too big, too fast, or too strange for the actual size of the moment. So here is the exercise, and I mean this literally. This week, pick one real overreaction you have, something recent, a flash of anger at a text message, a wave of shame after a small mistake, a sudden need to defend yourself when no one attacked you, and just ask it 3 plain questions. How old did I feel in that moment? Whose voice was I actually hearing underneath my own? And what did I need someone to say to me right then that they did not say? Sit with the answers even if they arrive slowly, even if the first honest answer is, I do not know. That not knowing is still more information than you had before you asked. You are not doing therapy on yourself here. You are simply doing what Jung did with the stopwatch. You are timing your own pause, and most people go their entire lives blaming the trigger, blaming the coworker, the comment, the small slight, the read receipt, when the real story was always the splinter underneath, sitting there long before the trigger ever arrived, waiting only for a word. I stop blaming the spark and start asking about the fuel. The 4th key is this, and here is where I want to turn this gently toward you rather than toward some man in a story. Because it is easy to nod along at a slapping aristocrat, and much harder to sit with your own version of him. Ask yourself honestly, where in your life do you perform a confidence you do not actually feel? Not lying exactly, but managing, curating, holding the mask very carefully in place, because underneath it, you are not sure the ground would hold you if the mask slipped. And I want you to picture one very ordinary evening, a dinner with people you half know. Someone asks what you have been working on lately, and you hear your own voice come out warm and easy and sure. You gesture, you laugh at the right moment, and from the outside, no one at that table would guess that underneath the gesture, your chest is tight, and your mind is already replaying the sentence you just said, checking it for weakness. And that gap, the gap between the voice they hear and the body living underneath it, is the exact site where the mask is doing its work. It is not that you are pretending to be a different person. It is that a piece of you has stepped forward to hold the room, while another piece of you stands behind it, watching, unconvinced. And the performance can be so smooth that even you forget which one is actually you. That performance is exhausting in a specific way. It is not the tiredness of hard work. It is the tiredness of vigilance, of never fully putting the shoulders down, because some part of you is always checking whether the room can see through you. And Jung's insight cuts right through this. When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate, that is from Ion. And it means precisely this. The doubt you refuse to look at directly does not disappear because you have refused it. It simply finds another way out. It leaks into your tone. It shows up as the joke that lands a half-second too defensive. It shows up as the way you check your phone, the instant a silence gets uncomfortable. It shows up as the small laugh you add to the end of a sentence, to soften it, before anyone can object. You did not choose any of that consciously. It happened outside you, as fate, wearing the disguise of just how you are. And this is worth sitting with, because it means the leak is not a character flaw. It is simply unclaimed material finding a crack. And I want you to actually catch yourself once this week, performing confidence rather than feeling it. Notice the exact physical sensation of it, a held breath, a straightened spine that costs something to maintain, a smile that is doing labor, a voice pitched slightly higher than it needs to be. That sensation is the complex borrowing your body for its own performance. And the strange relief here, the actual relief, is that you do not have to fix it in that moment. You only have to notice it without flinching away from the noticing. Because the moment you notice the mask is a mask. You are no longer entirely inside it. There is now a small sliver of you standing beside it, instead of hiding behind it. And that sliver is where everything else in this video begins. I let the mask show its seams, instead of holding it tighter. If this kind of teaching is helping you see your own patterns more clearly, consider subscribing, so the next one finds you. It costs you nothing, and it keeps this quiet work going between us. The fifth key is this, and I want to slow all the way down here because this is the actual mechanism, the whole engine room of why rewiring never works and something else does. First, consider what a complex actually wants. It is not trying to destroy you. Jung was careful about this. A complex forms around something that mattered, an old humiliation, an unmet need, a moment you were made small in front of people whose opinion you could not afford to lose. And because it carries real feeling, real memory, it behaves less like a flaw in the machine and more like an unheard voice inside a family that has learned to shout because no one ever listened when it spoke quietly. So the first thing to understand is that the part of you sabotaging your confidence is not your enemy. It is closer to an orphaned piece of your own history, still waiting for someone, meaning you, to finally turn around and take it seriously. Second, consider why willpower cannot touch it. This is the heart of the whole rewiring myth. When you try to force new confidence directly on top of an old wound, you are essentially telling the orphaned piece to be quiet and let the adult talk. And for a while, it will comply. That is why affirmations and forced positivity can feel like they work for a week or a month. But the orphan does not leave, it waits, and it always finds the doorway back in, usually at the worst possible moment. A stage, an interview, a first date, because pressure and exposure are exactly the conditions that call a complex awake. This is why so many confident-sounding people crumble the instant the stakes rise. The confidence was built over the wound instead of through it, and a flaw built over a hole is still a flaw with a hole under it. Third, consider what actually changes this, and here Jung's language is very precise. He never talked about erasing a complex or defeating it. He talked about making it conscious, which is a much stranger and much more patient act than it sounds. It means you stop reacting to the trigger and start turning toward the orphan itself. You ask it what it is actually afraid will happen. You ask it how old it thinks you still are. You let it finish a sentence it has been trying to say through your overreactions for years. And something remarkable happens when you do this honestly. The complex loses none of its history and all of its grip. It stops needing to hijack the wheel because it has finally been heard by the one person whose hearing it always wanted. Which was never a parent or a critic from years ago. It was you. Fourth, let me give you the shape of this across a single ordinary week rather than a single ordinary moment. Because complexes do not announce themselves once and vanish. They build slowly, and they release slowly too. Imagine you have been asked to give a toast at a family wedding. The invitation arrives on a Monday, and something in your stomach drops before you have even said yes. By Wednesday, you are rehearsing lines in the shower, not because the toast is difficult, but because some old scene is quietly replaying underneath it. A dinner table years ago, where you were laughed at for saying the wrong thing at the wrong moment. You do not consciously remember choosing to relive that scene, but your body has scheduled it anyway. By Friday, you have written and deleted the toast 4 times, each version more careful, more hedged, more armored against ridicule that no one at this actual wedding has any intention of offering you. And by the night itself, standing with the microphone in your hand, you feel that same old drop in your stomach, and you get through it, and it goes fine. Everyone laughs at the right places, and you drive home afterward not relieved but strangely flat, almost disappointed in yourself, because some part of you was braced the entire week for a humiliation that never had anything to do with this wedding at all. That flatness afterward is important. It is the orphan settling back down, having once again gone unheard, still convinced, still waiting, still scheduled to show up at the next toast, the next interview, the next moment someone hands you a microphone in any form. This is what it looks like when a complex runs the whole week instead of just the moment, and most people never trace the thread backward far enough to see it. They just call it nerves and move on, tired in a way they cannot quite explain. Fifth, consider what practical listening actually looks like instead of that week of quiet dread. Not therapy, simply self-education. The next time you feel that drop in the stomach arrive days before anything has even happened, try naming it plainly to yourself. Even in a whisper, something like, "There it is again," and then ask it one honest question. What happened to me once that made this feel dangerous? And then wait. Do not supply a tidy answer just to end the discomfort. Jung's whole method with the unconscious rested on this kind of patient waiting. He trusted that the psyche, given room and honesty, tends to answer if you stop shouting over it, with better thoughts, and start actually listening the way you would listen to a child tugging your sleeve in a crowded room while you keep talking past them to someone else. Sixth, and this is the turn I most want you to feel, the confidence that comes from this work is a completely different texture than the confidence you were originally chasing. The confidence you wanted was armor, unbreakable, impressive, built to survive any room without a scratch. The confidence this work actually produces is more like posture. It can bend. It does not need to win every room. It does not collapse into shame the moment something goes wrong, because it was never built on the lie that nothing would ever touch the wound again. It was built on the fact that you already know the wound. You have met it. You have asked it its name. You have sat with it through one whole ordinary week without running, and there is nothing left for it to ambush you with. That is the real rewiring, and it was never wiring at all. It was relationship. I turned toward the orphan instead of shouting it down. The sixth key is this, and it is the gentlest one, so let it land gently. The confidence that lasts is not loud. People picture total confidence as a kind of blazing, unshakable glow, something like a spotlight that never dims and never flickers. But what Jung actually pointed toward is closer to a lantern held at waist height in a dark room, steady, modest, enough to see the next step, and not much further than that, and that is actually enough, because the people you have always envied for their calm in hard rooms were very rarely people without complexes. They were simply people who had spent enough quiet hours listening to their own orphaned pieces that those pieces no longer needed to scream to be noticed. They speak now in a normal voice, and a normal voice is so much easier to walk beside than a scream. Now picture an ordinary evening. You are at a dinner with people who intimidate you a little, the kind of table where everyone seems to have an easy answer ready before the question even finishes, and you feel the old tightening start low in your chest, the urge to perform a certainty you do not actually feel, the pull to speak faster and louder just to cover the tremor underneath. But this time, you let there be one small breath of silence before you answer. You say only what is true for you, even if it sounds smaller than what the room seems to expect. And something quiet happens. No one notices the silence the way you feared they would. The room does not collapse because you did not blaze. This is the lantern at work. It does not need to outshine anyone else's light to be worth carrying. It only needs to be steady enough for you to see the very next step in front of you. So this week, when the old smallness shows up again, and it will, that is not a sign the work failed. Complexes do not vanish the way a debt gets settled once and forgotten. They mature. The way a childhood fear of the dark can soften over the years into simply preferring a nightlight near the bed. When the smallness shows up, you do not need to defeat it or hide it or perform your way past it. You only need to do the one thing that changes everything slowly and permanently. Turn toward it instead of away. Hold the lantern a little lower and a little steadier, and let that be enough for tonight. Because a confidence built this way does not need an audience to confirm it. It simply keeps you company in the very rooms you used to run from. I carry the lantern instead of waiting for the dark to end. Here is the whole picture. A complex is a splinter with its own will, and it can have you before you notice it. The stopwatch pause you cannot hide teaches you where it lives. The overreaction too big for the moment is its fingerprint. The mask you perform instead of feel is where it leaks out sideways. Listening to it as an orphan instead of shouting it down is the only rewiring that ever holds. And the confidence that survives contact with real life is quiet, not blazing. And underneath all 6 of these was really one single recognition, wearing 6 faces. You were never broken and never behind. You were simply carrying a piece of yourself you had not yet turned around to face. And turning around, slowly, without violence, is the whole art. I notice the moment my confidence collapses without warning, I stop calling it weakness and start calling it information. I make the unconscious conscious. And if you came here hoping to be rewired into someone unshakable, I hope you leave instead with something quieter and far more durable. The willingness to keep turning around, gently, every single time. So tell me honestly, the next time the old smallness taps you on the shoulder mid-sentence, will you flinch away from it again? Or will you finally, gently, face it?